In Chapter 1 of Critical Approaches to Reading, Writing, and Thinking, we cover the basics of critical thinking, like what it is, what are the components, what are some things that you need to be able to do in order to be a good critical thinker. So every PowerPoint in the course starts with a video that relates to the course topic. For time's sake, because my recordings are limited to 15 minutes, I'm not going to actually watch the videos, but I certainly encourage you to view the PowerPoint on your own and watch the video and think about how it relates to the topic that we're discussing. So each PowerPoint will also start with a slide that lists the questions you should be able to answer after reviewing this content. So between this video and the other resources in the course and the textbook resources, if you're using a textbook this semester, you should be able to answer the questions: what is critical thinking? What are the advantages and disadvantages of critical thinking, as well as what the character traits of a critical thinker are and what obstacles prevent us from thinking critically. So there are a list of terms that you should know at the beginning of each chapter. We'll be covering most of those in today's presentation, and if we miss any, just know that they are all in the course and in your textbook. So the first question that we want to address is really, what is critical thinking? The idea of critical thinking is a little bit different from just thinking, because critical thinking is, as your book calls it, a reflective, rational process that is used to make good decisions or to form beliefs that are more likely to be true. Essentially, critical thinking is different from your standard everyday thinking, because it's a process. We're going to engage in a series of steps, and we want to make sure that we're really considering certain things while we are thinking critically. It's the first step in a fully critical approach that also includes critical reading and critical writing. So being a critical thinker has several advantages. Your book outlines a whole host of resources and ideas, including that critical thinking can help you become a better student, that it's important for most careers, it allows you to adapt and make good decisions. It also can save you time, money, and embarrassment so that you don't fall for scams. There are a lot of benefits for critical thinking, no matter what field you're going into or no matter what career path you're pursuing. Critical thinking just kind of helps you be a better person. Even if you don't have a career at all, you still need to be able to communicate with your friends and family, manage your household, make decisions like buying a car and purchasing an insurance plan. All of those things rely on critical thinking. Unfortunately, being a good critical thinker also has some disadvantages. Because critical thinking is a process that takes time and effort to develop, some students, some people just don't really want to take that time, don't want to spend the energy. So that is a disadvantage. Critical thinking is also not a guarantee. Just because you've done your due diligence and followed the steps of the process, there's no guarantee that the decision that you make will be right. Good critical thinkers recognize that there's always an element of uncertainty, and you can make your best guess, but there's no promises. Another disadvantage of critical thinking is that really, once you've learned how to critically think about things in your life, you may find that some of your core beliefs need to be changed. It can also trigger defense mechanisms in your peer group or in your family. If you begin critically thinking and start changing the way that you engage with certain controversial topics in your life, you might find that your friends or your family don't always agree with your new thought process, and that can sometimes impact your relationships. So the best way to handle that really would be to encourage your friends and family to also be critical thinkers so that they can sort of reassess their beliefs as well. But it is worth noting that being a critical thinker can sometimes impact those relationships in your life, and can sort of cause you to maybe distance yourself from peers or friend groups that you maybe used to have. Critical thinkers should engage in several particular activities. Basically, the idea is to think critically about claims and evidence, facts. These include news stories that you see on the evening news or that you read about on social media, things that your friends or family relate to you. It's important to think critically and to use your knowledge to solve problems and make good decisions. Critical thinkers should always know that they won't be right all of the time. There's no guarantee. And it's important also to recognize when you need more information. It's okay to say, I don't know how to feel about this, or I don't know which way to vote, or I don't know what decision to make because I don't have enough information. That's absolutely okay. That's an important critical element of being a critical thinker. Critical thinkers should also develop a series of skills and character traits. We're going to talk about those a little bit more. Your book goes into detail discussing the following character traits of critical thinkers, and I'm just very briefly going to touch on each one. Intellectual curiosity is the idea that you are curious and interested in learning more about things around you, about topics that you don't know a lot about. Intellectual humility means that you recognize that you don't know everything. I know that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but we have to recognize that there's probably information out there that we don't know, and that might impact the way we think or believe about a certain topic. Another character trait of a good critical thinker is open-mindedness, which basically just means being able to consider new opinions and perspectives instead of being locked into one mindset or one perspective. You have to be willing to look at things from a different perspective. Critical thinkers tend to be organized in their thinking. They follow a set of steps. They are careful and considerate when thinking about an idea. They don't just jump to conclusions. Critical thinkers are typically also skeptical. Skepticism is essentially what that means is that you don't just believe everything that you see or that you read, right? That you question things and that you want to know more about them before you just believe whatever. Fair-mindedness is pretty self-explanatory. The part that really gets students, though, because typically they all raise their hand and they say, yes, I am fair-minded. But the question really is, can you be fair-minded if you are one of the sides of the argument? Then it becomes harder to be fair, right? Because we tend to believe in ourselves and our own beliefs. And we weigh them more heavily than others. So fair-mindedness involves giving both sides of an argument fair value, even if one of those sides is your own. Trust in reasoning is a character trait that requires critical thinkers to recognize when facts and evidence and science maybe trump their own personal emotions or beliefs. It's when you rely on logic and reason to make decisions instead of relying on emotion. And that's a tough thing to develop. And the final character trait of a critical thinker is persistence. Persistence means sticking with it, not giving up. It can be hard to be a critical thinker. It's easy to just throw your hands up and say, whatever, it doesn't matter, I'll believe whatever, or I'll just go along with it. Being a good critical thinker sometimes means putting in a little more time and energy to really read about a topic or understand it or learn more, and maybe sometimes taking the hard position that's not always the easy path or the easy decision. So those are some critical thinking traits that you should strive to develop. The last element of this chapter covers barriers to critical thinking. These are obstacles, sort of ways of thinking that tend to get in the way. They are obstacles to being a good critical thinker. So again, very briefly, I'm just going to go over each one and maybe give you an example. So some obstacles that are caused by the way we think include rationalizing, confirmation bias, and memory errors. Rationalizing is when you take a course of action or a decision that is maybe not very smart, and we rationalize it. We make it seem rational. So it's when you stay out late and choose not to study, and even though you know that's not a good decision, you rationalize it by saying, well, this quiz maybe isn't worth that many points. It's not going to be a big deal if I don't do well. Confirmation bias means that we only really notice or pay attention to information that goes along with our existing beliefs. So if you've ever been on the highways during the summer here in southern Delaware, you probably notice anytime a out-of-state driver cuts you off or does something, right? You probably really are aware when that happens. But you probably don't notice all of the times that out-of-state drivers are just driving along beside you without causing any trouble, right? We don't notice the things that don't fit with our beliefs. Memory errors manifest in a couple of different ways. Essentially, it just means that we like to think of ourselves as the hero of our story whenever we look back on something. We always place ourselves at the center of the story, and we tend to make our own position or decisions. We sort of look at them in a brighter light than they maybe are in reality. We also have some emotional obstacles. Attribution mistakes is where we attribute behavior to the wrong cause. When somebody else does something, we think it's because they're a terrible person, but when we do it, it's just a one-time thing. It's just a mistake. It's not a big deal. Wishful thinking is an obstacle to critical thinking when we make decisions based on our wishes instead of reality. Like saying, I'm not going to go look for a job because I probably am going to win the lottery tomorrow. That would definitely be a case of wishful thinking over critical thinking. And conformity just means that we like to fit in to our friends and our family and our peer group and the people around us. So sometimes we don't think critically because it's easier to just go along with what our parents told us, or what our pastor wants us to think, or our president, or our teacher even. Defense mechanisms are also barriers to critical thinking. Denial, anger, and avoidance are all various types of defense mechanisms. Denial just means saying, I don't want to talk about this, I'm not even going to discuss it. Anger obviously is another way of denial. You, instead of just denying the issue, you just get angry about it instead of engaging with the content. And avoidance, you just simply avoid anybody who makes you think about a topic in a particular way. So all of those barriers to critical thinking can stop us from making good decisions and forming, good critical thinking beliefs. Hopefully this chapter has helped you get an overview, an understanding of what critical thinking is, and some of the elements of just being a good critical thinker. The following chapters in the textbook will talk more about critical reading. We'll be talking about comprehension up next, and then we'll be talking about how to evaluate and analyze arguments in the following chapters.